Rollo, Ragnar Lothbrok's brother, the Viking who betrayed his own blood, the warrior who became a French duke, the traitor who founded Normandy and changed European history forever. This is not a story of loyalty and honor. This is family destroyed by jealousy and ambition. The man who lived in Ragnar's shadow and chose treason to escape it. The Viking who abandoned his gods for power. The brother who became an enemy. His descendants conquered England in 1066. His betrayal created the Norman Dynasty. His choice shaped 1,000 years of history. This is Game of Thrones, but real. This is the untold story of Ragnar's brother, the ultimate betrayal, the traitor who became a king. Was he justified? You decide. This is Rollo. Rollo, the brother who betrayed Ragnar Lothbrok, the Viking who became a French duke, the warrior who founded Normandy and changed European history forever. This is not a story of loyalty and honor. This is a story of jealousy, ambition, and the ultimate betrayal. The man who lived in his brother's shadow and chose treason to escape it. The Viking who abandoned his gods, his people, and his family for power. This is the true story of Rollo, Ragnar's brother, the traitor who became a king, the betrayer whose descendants would conquer England and rule for centuries. Rollo was born around 860 AD in Norway or Denmark. The sources disagree on exact location, but what is certain is that he was born into a world where his brother Ragnar would always overshadow him. From earliest childhood, Rollo lived in Ragnar's shadow. Ragnar was the favored son, the one their father praised, the one who seemed destined for greatness. Rollo was the second son, the one people noticed only in relation to his famous brother. The rivalry between them was intense, poisonous, and ultimately destructive from the very start. Every achievement of Ragnar's felt like a personal rebuke to Rollo, a reminder of his inferior status. When Ragnar won his first fight at age 12, demonstrating natural combat skill that impressed the warriors watching, Rollo felt the sting of being merely adequate where his brother was exceptional. When Ragnar led his first raid at 16, displaying tactical intelligence beyond his years, Rollo participated but received none of the credit. When Ragnar married the legendary shield maiden Lagertha, a woman whose beauty and warrior skills made her the most desired woman in Scandinavia, Rollo's own marriage prospects seemed pathetic by comparison. He wasn't weak or incompetent. In many ways, Rollo was Ragnar's equal as a warrior, and in some aspects perhaps even superior. Rollo was physically larger and stronger than Ragnar, could fight longer in battle, could wield heavier weapons with greater ease. But being equal to Ragnar, or even slightly better in some narrow aspects, meant nothing when Ragnar possessed something Rollo lacked. Charisma, the ability to inspire loyalty and devotion, the quality that made men willing to follow him into any danger. This difference was subtle but devastating. In a fight, Rollo might match or even defeat Ragnar. In a contest of strength, Rollo would win. But in leadership, in the ability to gather followers and build armies, Ragnar was supreme and Rollo was merely competent. And since leadership mattered more than individual combat prowess in determining who would achieve greatness in Viking society, Ragnar's advantages doomed Rollo to permanent second-place status, no matter how hard he tried. They raided together throughout their 20s and 30s, sailing the coasts of England and Francia in longships, terrorizing monasteries and coastal towns, accumulating wealth and reputation through violence and cunning. These were the glory years of Viking raiding, when Scandinavian warriors dominated the seas and struck terror throughout Christian Europe. Rollo and Ragnar fought side by side in dozens of battles and raids, saved each other's lives multiple times, shared the dangers and rewards of the Viking life. But even in successful raids where both brothers fought with distinction, Ragnar received disproportionate credit and fame. When they raided Lindisfarne Monastery together, it was Ragnar's tactical brilliance in timing the attack that was remembered, while Rollo's courage in leading the initial assault was forgotten. When they sacked a wealthy Frankish town, It was Ragnar's clever negotiation that extracted maximum ransom, while Rollo's fighting that captured the town was taken for granted. When they survived a storm that destroyed half their fleet, it was Ragnar's leadership that kept morale high, while Rollo's physical strength in manning the oars through the worst of it went unnoticed. The Skalds, the poets who preserved Viking history and legend through oral tradition, sang songs about Ragnar Lothbrok's raids and conquests. They described his cleverness, his courage, his success in loving detail. Rollo was mentioned, if at all, as Ragnar's brother or Ragnar's companion, a supporting character in someone else's saga. This was perhaps the most painful aspect of their relationship for Rollo, not just being overshadowed, but being reduced to a footnote in his brother's story. Warriors throughout Scandinavia wanted to join Ragnar's crews, competing for the honor of fighting under his command. They tolerated Rollo's presence as Ragnar's brother, but felt no particular desire to follow Rollo himself. Women throughout the Norse world admired Ragnar, singing songs about his exploits, hoping to catch his attention. They treated Rollo politely as Ragnar's brother, but showed no particular interest in him for his own qualities. This created a burning resentment in Rollo that grew stronger with each passing year. He loved his brother and hated him simultaneously. He wanted Ragnar's approval, but also wanted to destroy him. He fought alongside Ragnar, but dreamed of surpassing him. This internal conflict would eventually lead to betrayal. But that betrayal was years in the making. The turning point in their relationship came with Ragnar's famous raid on Paris in 845 AD, an event that would make Ragnar legendary throughout Europe while leaving Rollo even more bitter and resentful. The Vikings had raided Francia before, striking coastal monasteries and towns, but Ragnar's siege of Paris was different in scale and ambition. He assembled a fleet of 120 ships carrying perhaps 5,000 warriors, an enormous force by Viking standards, and sailed up the Seine River directly to the heart of Francia. The Frankish king Charles the Bald initially tried to defend Paris with his army, but Ragnar defeated the Frankish forces decisively in battle. Then, instead of simply looting the city and leaving as previous raiders had done, Ragnar besieged Paris, cutting it off, starving it, making clear he would stay until he received an enormous ransom. Charles, desperate to save his capital and facing internal political threats that required his attention elsewhere, agreed to pay 7,000 pounds of silver to make the Vikings leave. This payment, an astronomical sum that required melting down church treasures and imposing heavy taxes throughout Francia, made Ragnar the most famous Viking in the world. The story spread throughout Europe. The Norse warrior who had humiliated the Frankish king, who had held Paris hostage, who had extracted a fortune and sailed away untouched. Frankish chronicles recorded the event with horror and grudging admiration. Norse skalds composed elaborate poems celebrating Ragnar's tactical genius and bold leadership. Rollo had participated fully in the Paris raid and siege. He commanded one of the ships in the fleet. He fought in the battle that defeated the Frankish army. He participated in the siege operations that brought Paris to its knees. He risked his life just as much as Ragnar, fought just as hard, contributed just as much to the victory. But when history recorded the event, it was Ragnar's raid, Ragnar's victory, Ragnar's ransom. Rollo was there, certainly, but as a participant in Ragnar's achievement rather than as an equal partner or co-leader. The sagas that told of the Paris raid focused entirely on Ragnar. They described his clever tactics, how he used feigned retreats to draw Frankish forces into traps, how he positioned his ships to control the Seine and prevent escape or reinforcement, how he negotiated the ransom with a mixture of threats and diplomatic skill. Rollo appeared in these sagas, if at all, as one of several ship captains under Ragnar's command, his individual contributions invisible in Ragnar's shadow. This was the raid that broke something fundamental in Rollo's relationship with his brother. He had done everything right, had been brave and skilled and successful, had contributed significantly to one of the greatest Viking achievements ever. And still, he received no recognition, no fame, no acknowledgement of his worth beyond being Ragnar's brother who happened to be there. If even something as spectacular as the Paris raid couldn't earn him individual recognition, what possibly could? The resentment festered. Rollo began questioning why he should remain loyal to a brother who received all the glory while Rollo did the same work for a fraction of the recognition. He started wondering if there might be another path to greatness, a path that didn't require living in Ragnar's shadow forever. In 911 AD, that path revealed itself through an unexpected source. The very Frankish enemies the Vikings had been raiding for decades. The Frankish king, Charles the Simple, faced a problem. Viking raids were devastating Francia, and military solutions had failed repeatedly. The Vikings were too skilled at hit-and-run tactics, too mobile on their ships, too willing to simply raid elsewhere when one area became too well defended. Charles decided on a radical strategy. If he couldn't defeat the Vikings, perhaps he could convert one group of them into allies who would defend Francia against other Viking raiders. He needed a Viking leader ambitious enough to accept this offer, but also capable enough to actually hold territory and fight other Vikings effectively. He needed someone like Rollo. Rollo, after decades of raiding Francia, knew the land and its people better than most Vikings. He understood Frankish politics and military capabilities. And most importantly, he was desperate for an opportunity to escape his brother's shadow and prove himself greater than Ragnar. When Frankish envoys approached him with Charles's offer, Rollo saw his chance. The offer was extraordinary. Rollo would receive lands along the northern coast of Francia, the region that would become Normandy. He would rule as a duke under Frankish authority, would receive baptism and convert to Christianity, would marry a Frankish princess, and in exchange would defend Francia against other Viking raids and acknowledge Charles as his overlord. This meant betraying everything Rollo had been. It meant abandoning the Norse gods for Christianity. It meant swearing loyalty to the same Frankish king the Vikings had been raiding and humiliating for generations. It meant giving up the freedom of a Viking warrior for the responsibilities of a Frankish duke. Most painfully, it meant turning against other Vikings, potentially including his own brother. Rollo faced a choice that would define his entire life, his legacy, and his soul. He could remain loyal to Ragnar, to Viking traditions, to the Norse gods Odin and Thor, to everything he had been raised to value and believe, and continue living in his brother's shadow forever, dying eventually as Ragnar's brother, rather than as Rollo in his own right. Or he could betray all of that, betray his brother and his people and his gods, for a chance at his own kingdom, his own legacy, his own place in history completely separate from Ragnar. The decision tormented him. Sources suggest he spent weeks agonizing over it, alternating between accepting the Frankish offer and rejecting it as dishonorable. The internal conflict was devastating. Everything he had been taught since childhood said that loyalty to family was sacred, that betraying one's brother was among the worst sins imaginable. The Norse gods looked favorably on loyalty and punished betrayal. Converting to Christianity meant abandoning Odin and Thor, risking their eternal punishment. Fighting against other Vikings meant killing people who might be friends, comrades from previous raids, perhaps even relatives. But the opportunity was too great to refuse. Rollo would receive lands, title, wealth, power, everything he had dreamed of his entire life. He would rule as a duke, make his own decisions, build his own legacy. Most importantly, he would finally escape Ragnar's shadow, would be known for his own achievements rather than his brother's. The Frankish offer gave him what decades of loyal service to Ragnar had never provided: individual recognition and independent power. There was also a rationalization that made the betrayal easier to justify. Rollo could tell himself that the Viking age was changing, that the old ways of raiding and plundering were becoming less profitable as European kingdoms organized better defenses, that the future belonged to those who could adapt and integrate rather than remaining pure but increasingly irrelevant. He could argue that accepting the Frankish offer was pragmatic and forward-thinking rather than treacherous. Whether he truly believed this or was simply seeking excuses for doing what ambition demanded is impossible to know. He chose betrayal. In 911 AD, Rollo converted to Christianity in a ceremony at the Cathedral of Rouen. was baptized with the Christian name Robert in honor of his new Frankish allies, married Gisela, who was the daughter of King Charles the Simple, and became the first Duke of Normandy. He swore solemn oaths to defend Francia against all enemies, including Vikings, and acknowledged Charles as his overlord and king. The Viking warrior became a French nobleman, the pagan became a Christian, and most painfully, the brother of Ragnar Lothbrok became the enemy of Vikings and everything they represented. Ragnar's reaction to the betrayal, according to the sagas and chronicles, was one of profound rage mixed with devastating heartbreak. His own brother, the person he had fought beside for decades, had turned traitor, had abandoned their shared gods Odin and Thor for the Christian god, had sworn loyalty to the very Frankish kings they had been raiding and humiliating for years. Ragnar reportedly declared Rollo dead to him in all ways that mattered, erasing him from the family in the traditional Norse manner of treating a living person as if they had died. He forbade anyone in his household from speaking Rollo's name, ordered the skalds to remove Rollo from any songs about their shared exploits, cursed his brother's name and memory. Whether Ragnar and Rollo ever spoke again, whether they ever saw each other in person after the betrayal, the sources don't say clearly, but the relationship they had shared for over 40 years was clearly and permanently destroyed. The brothers who had raided together, fought together, survived together, were now enemies divided by betrayal, ambition, and the unbridgeable gap between Viking and French, pagan and Christian, loyal and treacherous. But Rollo's gamble paid off in ways that exceeded even his ambitious dreams. As Duke of Normandy, he proved to be a brilliant administrator and military leader. He successfully defended his new territory against other Viking raids, using his knowledge of Viking tactics to defeat his former comrades. He integrated Viking and Frankish populations, creating a unique culture that combined Norse martial prowess with Frankish administrative sophistication. He established Rouen as his capital and built it into a significant city. He encouraged trade and agriculture, making Normandy prosperous and powerful. He created institutions and laws that would outlast him by centuries. Most importantly, he founded a dynasty that would change European history in ways he couldn't have imagined. Rollo's descendants became some of the most important figures in medieval Europe. His great-great-great-grandson was William the Conqueror, who invaded England in 1066 and became King of England, establishing a dynasty that still sits on the British throne today through various successions and marriages. The Norman conquest of England was a direct result of Rollo's decision to betray his Viking heritage and become a French duke. But there was a cost to Rollo's success, a price paid in identity and belonging. He was no longer truly Viking, having abandoned the gods and ways of his people. But he was never truly Frankish either, always marked as the former Viking, the converted barbarian, the necessary evil that Charles had allied with out of desperation rather than respect. Rollo existed in between, belonging fully to neither world. And he had destroyed his relationship with his brother, the person who had been most important to him for most of his life. The rivalry that had poisoned their relationship ended not in reconciliation, but in permanent separation and mutual hatred. Rollo got his kingdom and his legacy, but he lost his brother and his heritage to get them. The question that haunts Rollo's story is whether the trade was worth it. Did he make the right choice? From a purely practical standpoint, yes, absolutely. Rollo became a duke, founded a lasting dynasty, changed history. His descendants became kings, while Ragnar's descendants mostly faded into obscurity after a few generations. Rollo's gamble on betrayal paid off spectacularly in worldly terms. But from an emotional and spiritual standpoint, the answer is less clear. Rollo lived the rest of his life separated from his brother, from his people, from his gods, from everything that had defined him in his youth. He won power and land, but lost belonging and authenticity. He became great, but also became a traitor. His success was built on betrayal, and that foundation poisoned everything built upon it. The sagas treat Rollo with complexity, not simple condemnation or celebration. He was brave and brilliant, but also treacherous and ambitious to the point of destroying what should have been sacred bonds. He achieved greatness through means that violated honor and loyalty. He proved that betrayal could be profitable, but also that success gained through betrayal carries a permanent stain. Modern historians debate Rollo's legacy. Some see him as a pragmatic visionary who recognized that the Viking Age was ending and adapted successfully to changing circumstances. Others view him as an opportunistic traitor who betrayed his people and his brother for personal gain. Both perspectives have merit, and perhaps both are true simultaneously. What is undeniable is that Rollo's decision to betray Ragnar and become Duke of Normandy changed European history in profound ways. Without Rollo's Normandy, there would have been no Norman conquest of England. Without the Norman conquest, English history would have been completely different. The language, culture, politics, and institutions of England were fundamentally shaped by William the Conqueror's invasion, which was only possible because his great-great-great-grandfather Rollo had established Normandy 2 centuries earlier. Rollo died around 930 AD, having ruled Normandy for approximately 20 years. He was buried in Rouen Cathedral, a Christian burial in a Christian church, far from the Viking burial rites of his youth. His grave stood as a symbol of his transformation from Viking raider to French duke, from pagan to Christian, from Ragnar's brother to founder of his own dynasty. His legacy lived on through his descendants, the dukes and eventually kings who ruled Normandy and England. The Plantagenet dynasty, the Angevin Empire, the Norman English culture that dominated medieval Britain, all traced back to Rollo's decision to betray his brother and his people for power and land. From the Viking who raided Francia to the Duke who defended it, from Ragnar's overshadowed brother to the founder of a dynasty that would rule England, from loyal family member to ultimate traitor, Rollo's life was defined by transformation through betrayal. He proved that ambition could overcome loyalty, that personal success could be built on the destruction of sacred bonds, that greatness could be achieved through means that violated everything once held dear. If you enjoyed this saga of the brother who betrayed Ragnar and changed history, subscribe to Viking Valhalla for more untold stories of legendary warriors. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another epic tale. Was Rollo's betrayal justified? Let us know in the comments. Until next time, may your choices be wise and your legacy endure. Skål!